every time it's a new step in realizing like, hey, this is where I wanted to be, but now that I'm here, I want to go somewhere else. I started doing graffiti in 1993. I think I was 16 or 17. So it's like, you know, it's not even that young, you know, because there was already a lot of graffiti visible. Like basically it all started in the Netherlands or in Eindhoven where I lived back then. It started around 87, 88. So these times were really like a booming period of graffiti. And yeah, it was very, for me, everything came together. It's like, it was pictorial, it was strong, and it was illegal. So you kind of had this idea like, wow, how do they do that, you know? It was very magical, you know? And of course, that's an aspect that I can't think of now, you know, like with all the techniques, you can see so much online already. It's such a fast visual world now. But back then it wasn't, because you could only get an impression of what you saw. So it was all very visual, but also based on low input, like you didn't have a lot of input, and the input that you had a lot of impact. So that's also almost the opposite of what it is now. There's so much input, but it hardly has an impact. And this, I think, was a really, because of that, it really triggered me. I came also a little bit from the skate culture, because I was kind of starting to do that, but I think I realized it was better for me to progress in graffiti than into skateboarding after like always falling and whatever, like almost breaking my neck. So I wasn't the biggest talent in that, so it was a kind of natural selection, I guess. And you know, from there I went to, you know, art school, and that whole process started. But I guess it's like also these elements that still are vital to me. It's this kind of freedom, you know. And the strange thing with graffiti is that, like, once I got into it a bit harder, like you know, like 95 or 96, and being really active, and you know, like on different levels, you do illegal graffiti, and also you would, like in Eindhoven, I was part of like arranging quite a few of these Hall of Fames, because it was just initiative. Like you had some photos, you would go to this company that had like a big wall, and you would say like, hey, you have this wall in the back alley, can we do something with that, you know? And then they were like, oh, okay, whatever, you know, go ahead. And then, you know, it would grow into a kind of Hall of Fame, which of course is a very big push towards people doing things in daytime and using these skills in the nighttime. So we had a really kind of vital scene, and that was a bit later. I went to art school in Rotterdam, so I moved to Rotterdam, and it was a very different scene, because there was like it was a more I think it was a much more competitive kind of graffiti scene. They didn't have that much of these kind of Hall of Fames, so there wasn't this laid-back vibe of people being supportive. There it seemed a little bit more, in my aspect, like in my view, coming from Eindhoven to Rotterdam, it seemed like it was really kind of negative, like it was kind of like pushing you down, like all the things that I started continuing doing graffiti like I did in Eindhoven. And I came to Rotterdam, and it was all crossed, and go back to where you came from, and like really kind of, yeah. So you realize like, okay, there is this kind of stubborn aspect of graffiti as well. So I realized like, whoa, the freedom is important, but then you do graffiti because you think freedom is important, and you realize the world of graffiti is actually not so free, you know. It's very it's very narrow-minded in a way. There's a certain set of rules, and you kind of stick to those rules, and anything that kind of touches the rules or grows out of it is not really embraced, you know. So a tag, a piece, a throw-up, it's like all fixed formats in a way. So it's really fun, but the problem is on an artistic level, it's pretty limiting. You can have a own handwriting, you can have a signature style that says like, okay, it's obvious that somebody has a more personal approach, but it's a personal approach to these like fixed themes, you know. So in that sense, I think graffiti has more to do with sport, you know, because it's related to fixed rules. They determine the lines of the field on a metaphorical but also almost a realistic way. And within these lines of the field, there's the play, you know, with 11 people on this side, 11 people on that side, and a ball. and two goals, you know, and that's the space to play in, you know, literally, and which I think is an interesting motivation because of the fact that the rules are strict. It works like that. The sport didn't change. I mean, I think we're playing soccer on this field for ages, and it didn't really change, you know. So there's a reason for that, you know, and which is fine. Which is the same with graffiti. It's fun to do it like it is meant to be, you know. But if you want it differently, especially then, you know, it's really normal to have all these different other ways of doing it. But then back then there was suddenly a need to find different ways of execution. Around 96, 97, I met different people that also had a different mindset. So we started using different materials. So we started, you know, using our printers with sticker sheets and like screen print posters and stuff like that. And then we realized, it's fun again because it's free again. It's not graphic design, it's not art, it's not graffiti. It's in between all these different things that we liked. But we like to do it on our own terms, you know, not on the terms that were defined by art school that we were going to in daytime, or that were defined by the kind of close-minded graffiti rules. So that was also this kind of free initiative. And I think from there a lot of ideas came, and even resulted to like the beginning of the 2000s, where you realize like, hey, it's growing. Like we would visit people like living in Rotterdam. I became friends with Jeroen influenza, and there were the people of Space 3 in Eindhoven and Betamax, and we were all joining up. We would like travel to different places. We traveled to Prague, for instance, but we also traveled a lot to Paris, meeting local people there, like Stark and Honette, and, you know, having really good time there. But realizing there was so much going on with, like, you know, Space Invader and like so many people working in the streets on their own terms, you know, in a very different approach. And this was a very exciting period. So in a way, it's like a second excitement of the magic of urban space. Compared to, for instance, the 90s or the beginning of the 90s or even the late 80s, where you had also a similar kind of magic experience of seeing stuff, you know. So, and I guess it's important to feel that, to feel that environment, you know, like the shared magic in a way. Yeah. Basically, my biggest kind of reference and my background has been more pictorial. Like I was an illustrator, also for kids' books and like magazines and newspapers. So very like a visual narrative that was leading. Like you would use a figure of speech, literally, to illustrate a topic. And I was a drawer, like a line drawer, like drawing figures and drawing IDs, you know, so visualizing IDs. And I think this background to me has been very useful also as a kind of contrast with doing graffiti. Like I was in art school developing more the pictorial qualities and like being a drawer and being a good drawer or a good illustrator. But then next to that, working with letters is a very different field, you know. So I started in art school with graphic design, but then I realized I was more of a drawer, so I wanted to draw. So, but then working with letters already was in my system because of starting with graffiti before going to art school. So in that sense, it felt like this freedom was something I wanted to keep. So it was perfect because it went aside the illustrative work and the graffiti work, and it developed in its own way. So I guess like in 2005 or 6, when all these different developments were going on, also with you know, internet and, you know, with street art being called street art, you know, suddenly you realize like, hey, wait a second, the freedom that we had since the mid-90s or the late 90s, it's not something that is forever, you know, because suddenly you felt that, you know, I remember there was Toyota or like some car brand, and they started to do a big campaign with street art, even with Osgemius or something, you know. So I was like, wow, this goes really fast. Now you realize like this world is changing so rapidly. Do I still like it like that, you know? So you feel like, hey, I had this moment where I was working a lot with just text, you know, just with black and white text images. So not like in a visually impressive way, or like as a drawer or an illustrator or as a typographer, but really very basic text, but very kind of, you know, almost a conceptual approaches towards working in the street and towards working with the freedom of the street, because I felt I needed to resist against the over emphasizing of you know, the illustrative quality, or you know, the nice images of you know, the street art world, you know. So I felt I had to rebel almost against that, because I wanted the freedom back, you know. And I think this phase has been very important for me, because after that I could realize like, okay, I can bend it towards a conceptual approach that is a framework. And within this framework, like creating my own kind of football, my soccer field, but a very strangely shaped, like a polygonal, weird soccer field with one player, that's me, and my own rules, you know. But then even if you have your own conceptual framework, within that framework you can still have this freedom of expression. So I needed to go one way and then to swing back to another. So actually I think around that time, so 2008, 2009, I started to allow myself to feel free again to draw, but then not in a kind of figurative way. I started doing these big murals, which are called horrorvaki. So it's like the fear of emptiness. And I did like 10 or 15 of these really big ones in museum context, but also in Poland, like in Poznan, and with a festival. It was one of the first festivals that I went to. And actually they were just like the same format. You had like a white space, a white blank space, and then I would start on the left and end in the right, and actually just scribble on and on, just reactionary. Because to me it was kind of like, you know, it didn't matter anyway what you did, because it was all in the street art context. So it was all like, you know, this kind of bombarding of images that was really happening at that moment. But in the meantime, I was using this visual language and all its kind of cliches and all the things that popped up in my head while doing it. I was also doing it to feel free in expression and change it all the time and compose my own language because of that. So that was again a phase that I had to go through to get to another step. So, and after that step, I felt like even more liberated to, you know, to not feel connected anymore, to not feel like being a street artist or being a graffiti writer or being from art school as an illustrator, you know. I felt like, hey, I can be my own discipline, you know, I can be my own visual language. That's the language I speak, you know. So in that sense, all these steps have been important to reach phase that I've been in the last 5 or 6 years, where even compared to the mural that I did here in Besançon in 2013, I could see that there was again in a kind of middle ground of working with letter shapes, working with abstract shapes, working with linear, like figurative illustrations, and not really choosing. So not really wanting to choose the one or the other, but kind of have it all at the same time. And I think this led also to the work I've been doing lately with like the past 5 years or 5 or 6 years, where it's been kind of still it's drawings that I do, but they're the most simple versions of what I've been doing, and actually it's all in there. So to me it's all connected. So everything is in these drawings. So my sketchbook is full of these like drawings that are kind of letters, kind of refer to buildings or architectural shapes or decorative ornaments, and it's exactly what my interest is. It sounds weird, but it's like a celebration of doubts, you know? Like you have so many doubts, and every time you think you figured something out, you move up a new step. Like for instance, in this quest for free art, the freedom of art, which I think I started without even realizing it. I started it in let's say the 80s or the 90s when I was a kid. Every time you reach a point, like in graffiti, I was like, that's such a nice form of art. And then you get into graffiti and you really, really feel it, and you go through your hands and system, and all the way. And then you realize, like, okay, maybe this is not what I thought, and then you move further. So I think that's exactly the thing. It's the journey, not the destination. But in a very literate way, because it has to do with me as a person, and hopefully as a person you grow. So you grow in the artistic field, in the reflection of where you are and what you do, and that's the basis. That's for me the challenge. You know, that's the quest to try and make steps and change it. Maybe not really big steps, but they're small steps. But then they need to feel like they're my steps. You know, they're my they come from my motivation. They come from my line of work. And this, I think, the more work you make, the more you get aware of it. But on the other hand, also the harder it is to make these changes. Also because I became a professional in what I do. And it's very weird because I still, if I need to emphasize what I'm doing, I'm still sometimes think like, what the hell am I doing? You know, so it's like, and I got professional in doing that, you know, in not knowing what I'm doing. So it's like, wow, you know, how did I get to this point? And I think it's fantastic that it's possible, like also in relation to, even in relation to things like street art or whatever, because it takes the big mechanism to have like also things around it that interest you or that move you, and you don't need to participate in the big mechanism. But then, you know, just like society, if it's there, you can reject it, or you can just take a little bit and make your own choices, you know. So I think that's really interesting, that how these things develop throughout the years. I love the friction between writing and drawing, you know. Like, it's the same thing with tagging. Like, if you have the same tag, it seems like you're writing, but actually you're drawing, because you form a logic and then you repeat that logic, and that's the same tag. It's difficult to explain in a way, but I feel the friction is there, or the challenge is to, you know, maybe like when I was tagging, I would really find it challenging to every time try it a little bit different. So you would, one time you did this form and then it changed to that and then became more sharp and then it became, and every time it would grow. So you would like, you would be really aware of the momentary effect of a line, you know, that there is no second chance. You just have to do it straightforward. So it takes a lot of like skill in a way, but also it takes the kind of challenge to let it go, let the skill go, and try to, you know, dare to make the mistake as well, you know. So, but this process, I became part of the sketchbook process, where you would just make small drawings, and then I would kind of have to shut it off, and then start again with the next square, and then, but they would all be reactionary. So if this one was really triangular, the next one would be more like fluid, or then there would be one with both aspects, or so it's reactionary. You know, it's like when you do like, I'm not so much into calligraphy, but what I like about calligraphy is that you're working on a page and you start and it's still okay to do it. But then the more you get to the end of the page, the more risk there is involved in making mistakes. Because if you make a mistake, you have to do everything again, you know. But building up this tension, step-by-step tension, and building up the risk of this storyline you're telling in a way, I find it really fascinating, because it's a step-by-step disaster or it's a step-by-step accomplishment, you know. But you don't know until you reach the end, you know. So there is something that really attracts me in that, in a way that didn't change in the past like 30 years almost, or 25 years, because if I were doing designs for my graffiti work, I would do the same. I would make a design and you would find a certain flow, and you would do another one which is kind of similar to that one but also different, and the third one is even more different, and then after 5 of these designs it's totally different, but you reached it through a very natural process. So for some reason I think it's very important to always have it linked to what I was doing before, but also want to change and allow the change and allow the failure, you know, and maybe through failure discover like, oh, this is so bad and so good, because now I realize it can be done differently, you know. So